What if the person you thought you knew harbored a past woven with unimaginable sacrifices? At Cypress Grove Cemetery, Robert Henley's funeral would reveal just that. A solemn silence had settled over the freshly dug earth, broken only by the gentle breeze that whisked away the hushed murmurs of the gathered mourners. Family, friends, and acquaintances all had come to pay their final respects to a man revered throughout the community for his charitable work and unwavering warmth. The polished black headstone gleaming under the afternoon sun bore a simple inscription, "A life of service and sacrifice." Yet, amongst the sea of black and muted tones, one figure subtly drew the eye. An elderly black woman. Her modest, deep green dress flowed gently, her silver hair neatly tucked beneath a simple hat. In her steady hands, she clutched a single red rose, its crimson petals a stark contrast to her own quiet composure. While her hands remained firm, her eyes told a different story, a silent testament to a weight of emotion far deeper and heavier than any present. Unacknowledged by most, she stood apart at the edge of the assembly, her presence both understated and profoundly commanding. It wasn't until the pastor's final prayer had faded into the stillness that she moved. Slowly, deliberately, she stepped forward, the soft crunch of gravel beneath her heels echoing loudly in the sudden quiet. As she made her way to the front, the mourners instinctively parted, creating a path for her. Reaching the grave, she paused, her gaze fixed on the polished casket below. With an almost sacred reverence, she gently placed the single red rose upon its surface, then turned to face the expectant crowd. "My name is Hattie DeLay," she began, her voice steady and remarkably clear, cutting through the lingering silence. "I doubt many of you know me, but I knew Robert better than anyone here." A collective gasp, then a ripple of surprise swept through the assembled mourners. Faces turned, brows furrowed, and whispers erupted. Who was this woman? How could she claim such an intimate connection to the man they had all believed they knew so profoundly? Hattie's calm yet resolute gaze swept over the sea of bewildered faces. "Before today ends," she continued, her voice gaining a quiet power, "you'll understand why I'm here. And you'll understand the Robert Henley most of you never knew." Her words hung in the air, a potent, unspoken promise. What Hattie was about to share would compel everyone to reevaluate everything they thought they understood about the man they had come to honor. The murmurs had subsided, replaced by the soft rustle of leaves as Hattie drew a deep breath. When she spoke again, her voice carried a calm authority that compelled every ear to listen. "I met Robert 50 years ago," she began, her gaze growing distant as if the memories were unfurling before her very eyes. "It wasn't here, in this peaceful town. It was in Montgomery, Alabama, during a time when people like me weren't welcome in places like this." The crowd leaned in, a palpable sense of curiosity now flickering in their eyes. Hattie continued, her voice now tinged with a complex blend of pride and pain. "Robert was just a young man back then, full of fire and ambition. He worked as a teacher, but his true heart was in the civil rights movement. That's where our paths crossed, on the steps of a church, where we were organizing sit-ins. He wasn't afraid to stand beside me, even when it meant risking his job, his reputation, or facing violent threats." A wave of audible gasps rippled through the stunned group. The Robert Henley they knew, the kind, generous benefactor, was suddenly overshadowed by a revolutionary figure they could barely conceive. None had ever heard of his involvement in such profound struggles. Hattie let the weight of her words settle, allowing the full impact to register before pressing on. "We weren't just comrades in the fight for justice," she continued, her voice softening, a tender note entering her tone. "We were friends. No, more than friends. We became each other's family when the world seemed determined to tear us apart. He was there for me when I lost my sister to the violence of those times, and I was there for him when he had to rebuild his life after being ostracized by his own." Hattie's hand trembled slightly as she adjusted her hat, her gaze fixed on the polished casket. "We shared meals, stories, tears. He called me his sister in every way that mattered, even when it wasn't safe for him to say it out loud." The crowd shifted uncomfortably, the sheer gravity of her revelation sinking in. It was difficult, almost impossible to reconcile this raw, resilient image of Robert with the polished philanthropist they knew, a man who had quietly helped many, but never once spoke of his own profound battles. "But," she asserted, her voice growing firmer, a renewed resolve in her eyes, "what I'm telling you isn't just about the past. It's about the man he became because of those struggles." She paused, scanning the faces before her, allowing the silence to stretch just long enough for her words to truly resonate. But what Hattie shared next would transcend their shared bond, pulling back the curtain on sacrifices none of them could have possibly imagined. Hattie's hands clenched tightly around her purse, her voice unwavering as she continued, "And I didn't just survive the times we fought through. We fought through them, but that fight demanded sacrifices that left marks on both of us, marks most of you would never see." She glanced at the crowd, her piercing eyes meeting theirs as if daring anyone to look away. In 1967, Robert lost his job for attending a march in Selma. The school board called it unbecoming conduct, but we all knew what it really was: retribution. He didn't tell anyone here about it because he didn't want pity. He packed up what little he had and moved to a small, one-bedroom house on the south side of Montgomery. That's where he lived, scraping by on tutoring gigs, never once abandoning the fight. Hattie's voice cracked slightly, a rare hint of vulnerability, as she continued. "When my own house was firebombed in retaliation for hosting meetings, it was Robert who showed up in the middle of the night with his car. He drove me and my two nephews to safety without hesitation, knowing full well the immense risk." She turned back to the casket, her expression softening, a tender, sorrowful gaze. That's who Robert was. Not just the polished man in the tailored suit most of you remember, but someone who walked through fire for the people he cared about. The crowd stood in stunned silence, utterly captivated. From her purse, Hattie then carefully pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This," she said, holding it up for all to see, "is a letter Robert wrote to me in 1972. I want to read just one part to you." Hattie unfolded the letter with the utmost care, her hands shaking just enough to convey the profound depth of its meaning. She began to read aloud, her voice trembling slightly, but perfectly clear. "Hattie, you are the sister I chose when life gave me none. We have shared burdens no one should bear, but I would carry them again for you without question. You remind me every day that love is not." Idea Vajray. About blood. It's about who shows up when the world turns its back. Her voice broke on the last line, and she paused, fighting to regain her composure. The crowd, previously so stoic, now shifted visibly. Some dabbed at their eyes, while others stared at the ground in quiet shame, suddenly feeling the weight of their ignorance regarding this profound side of the man they had come to honor. "Robert never turned his back on anyone," Hattie said, folding the letter with meticulous care. "Not even when it cost him everything. And yet, how many of you here knew any of this? How many of you cared enough to ask?" She let the question hang in the air, the weight of her words pressing down on the group like a heavy, inescapable fog. But as the stark truth of Robert's sacrifices began to fully sink in, Hattie was about to reveal something even more profound, an act of quiet courage that would redefine his legacy forever. The air seemed to grow heavier, dense with unspoken history, as Hattie pressed on, her words laced with both sorrow and defiance. "There's one more truth about Robert, a truth none of you would have guessed, yet it's one that shaped everything he stood for." The crowd tensed, hanging on her every word as she took a slow, steadying breath. Robert didn't just fight for others. He fought a battle no one could see. For years, he hid the fact that he was supporting a child, a son he couldn't openly claim because of who the mother was. A collective gasp rippled through the group. Hattie's eyes swept across their stunned faces, but she pressed forward without hesitation. His son, Samuel, was born to a woman Robert couldn't marry because of the time and place they lived in. The boy was black like me, and Robert was forced to keep it quiet for fear of what it would do to his career and reputation in certain circles. The whispers grew louder now, people exchanging glances of disbelief and dawning realization. But Hattie wasn't finished. "I was there when Samuel was born," she said softly, her voice taking on a tender quality. "And Robert made sure that boy never went without. He paid for his schooling, wrote letters every week, and visited whenever he could, often under the cover of darkness. He made sure Samuel had everything he never had. Growing up, a father's love, even if it had to be a quiet love." Tears welled in her eyes, but her voice remained strong and clear. "And Samuel, the man you didn't know existed, is here today." At that, a tall man stepped forward from the back of the crowd. His presence was commanding, with broad shoulders and a quiet dignity in the way he moved. The resemblance to Robert was unmistakable. The crowd turned, their gazes stunned into absolute silence. Samuel walked up to Hattie and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion, "for everything." Hattie smiled at him through her tears. "It was always my honor," she whispered. She turned back to the group, addressing them once more. "Robert loved all of you in his way, but his truest love was in the people he fought for. Those of us who didn't have the luxury of being seen in polite society. That's why I'm here today, to make sure you know the real man behind all the accolades." The silence that followed wasn't just shock. It was reflection, a profound reckoning with a truth that had been hidden in plain sight. But before the mourners could fully process what they'd learned, Hattie had one final story to share, a moment of profound bravery that would define Robert's legacy forever. The crowd stood frozen, the weight of Hattie's words settling over them like a blanket too heavy to shake off. The murmurs that had filled the air earlier were utterly gone, replaced by a deafening silence. All eyes were on Samuel, who stood tall and resolute beside Hattie, his very presence a living testament to the secrets Robert had carried. An older man near the front of the group cleared his throat, his voice breaking the stillness. I never knew, he stammered, his gaze fixed on Hattie. Robert never said a word about any of this. Hattie's gaze softened as she looked at him. He wasn't the kind of man to seek praise for doing what was right, she said. But make no mistake, he carried the weight of these sacrifices every single day. A middle-aged woman, her face streaked with tears, stepped forward hesitantly. I remember him helping my family when my father lost his job, she said, quietly. I thought I understood his kindness then, but now it feels so much deeper. Hattie nodded, her voice steady, yet filled with profound emotion. Robert didn't just give out of convenience, he gave because he understood what it meant to go without, and he never wanted anyone to feel that same pain. The group began to stir, fragments of their own memories of Robert bubbling to the surface. Each story shared now painted a richer, more complex picture of a man whose boundless generosity and quiet strength were deeply rooted in a life few of them had truly understood. But it wasn't just the memories that hung in the air. It was a palpable sense of guilt. Many began to realize they had only known the polished version of Robert, the man who wore his success like a shield, inadvertently protecting the profound truth of his struggles. A young man near the back finally spoke up, his voice trembling with raw emotion. It's not fair, he said, his hands clenching into fists. He deserved to be celebrated for everything, not just the parts we wanted to see. Hattie turned to him, her expression softening with understanding. You're right, she said gently. But Robert wasn't a man who cared about credit. He cared about impact. And his greatest legacy isn't the plaques on the walls or the accolades in your programs. It's the lives he touched, yours, mine, and Samuel's. Samuel stepped forward then, his voice low but firm, carrying a quiet authority. My father always told me that the measure of a person isn't what they leave behind in things. It's what they leave behind in people. And standing here today, I see that he left behind more than I ever imagined. The crowd seemed to breathe as one, their collective guilt giving way to a deeper, more profound understanding of the man they'd come to mourn. Tears fell freely now, not just for Robert's passing, but for the profound realization of his unseen sacrifices. But as the crowd began to grasp the full weight of Robert's life, Hattie prepared to share one final, pivotal story. A moment that would leave them forever changed. Hattie took a moment to steady herself, her hands clasped tightly together as she gazed out at the crowd. The air was heavy, not with sorrow alone, but with a newfound respect for the man they thought they had known. Yet there was one more story she needed to share, a final act of Robert's life that would irrevocably define his legacy. 2 months before Robert passed, she began, her voice softer, now almost a whisper. He called me. He wasn't well, but his spirit hadn't faltered. He told me he was putting together a trust, not for himself or his estate, but for the children in this community. Children whose parents struggle to make ends meet. Children who deserve opportunities, but are often overlooked. The crowd stirred again, their expressions a mix of surprise and dawning awe. He knew he wouldn't live to see the trust in action, Hattie continued, her voice breaking slightly with emotion. But he didn't care about that. What mattered to him was planting the seed, making sure it would grow long after he was gone. Samuel stepped forward, his deep voice adding a resonant layer to Hattie's words. "That trust is real," he said firmly. "It's already been established, and it's going to provide scholarships, after-school programs, and mentorship for kids in need. My father wanted his life to mean something, not just to the people he knew, but to the generations that would come after him." Hattie looked around, her gaze meeting each mourner's eyes, connecting with them. "That was Robert's greatest gift," she said. "He didn't need recognition or applause. He just needed to know he had done his part to make the world a little better." A long silence followed, the profound weight of her words settling deep into the hearts of everyone present. Some nodded quietly, others wiped away tears, and a few simply stood still, lost in contemplation. Hattie gently placed her hand on the polished headstone, her voice growing softer but no less resolute. "So now, I leave you with this. How will you be remembered? Not for the things you had or the titles you earned, but for the lives you touched and the love you gave." She turned back to the crowd, her expression kind but firm. "If Robert taught us anything, it's that true legacy isn't written in stone, it's written in the hearts of the people you lift up." The crowd seemed to exhale collectively, the immense emotional weight giving way to a quiet, profound reflection. Hattie gave a final gentle nod to Samuel before stepping back, allowing the moment to settle into the solemn quiet. As the mourners slowly began to disperse, many approached Hattie and Samuel, offering words of gratitude and solemn promises to honor Robert's extraordinary legacy. Cypress Grove Cemetery, once a place of somber finality, had transformed, becoming a space of renewed purpose and a testament to a life truly lived.